to introduce to you one of the most brilliant Slavic linguists in the world today. Ronald Feldstein, who was chair for many years of the Indiana University Slavic Department, has taught a broad variety of linguistics courses. He also is a translator. He also teaches Russian and Polish courses in addition to his theoretical linguistics. I had the great honor to study with him, and it's a privilege to have him here today. And he has some incredibly insightful theoretical works that can help improve your practical knowledge as well. And this particular piece, The Basic Principles of Russian Noun Stress, is a gem, and I'm so happy that you're here and can engage with this topic. So thank you for coming, and it's a great honor to have you.
Thank you very much. And even though half of those nice things are questionable about me, I'm going to talk about Russian stress. And I'll warn you in advance that there are some items that require a lot of attention and sometimes seem like really hard until you get into them. Which is one reason I like to work with stress, because I had a really hard time with it. And I always felt that, like, every time I see a new Russian word, there's like a new stress type. And like, I wonder how many of these are there. I mean, like, you know, I think that I've struggled with 18 already, and I'm always getting a 19th or a 20th, and you know, when does this ever end? How am I ever going to, like, really learn this language the way normal people speak it? Was what bothered me a lot, like many years ago. Then one day I decided to just, like, look at the materials that were written about it. I could read Russian pretty well, and what I did was I got as many books on Russian stress as I could, written by Russian authors, and I looked at how they described it. So I took my notebook out and started to write, all right, this type, this type, this type. And what it seemed to just make a catalog. Everyone had a different catalog. And so, like, if there's maybe one person will have 20 stress types, one person will have 25 stress types. And at that moment, this was like, when I did this was like around 1980, maybe 79. Because, I published the paper about it in 79. So I guess it must have been 78, because I couldn't publish the paper the same moment I was looking at this. I was under the influence of Roman Jakobson's one-stem verb system. And I knew what he tried to do, and I tried to see if I could analyze it in a way that would kind of reduce the number of groups, but have some general rules involved. So, like, instead of, 14 groups of stress types or 15 groups of stress types, maybe there's a way of saying that there are, like, maybe 2 or 3 stress types, but that if you know certain things about the words involved, then you'll know that if it's a certain stress type, you know what it is. And what I came up with is something that, in a way, answered what I wanted at the time, but I've kept at it and tried to refine it over the years. That the only problem is that it isn't really, like, easy for students. Maybe for, I'm not even sure. Just as people argue about the value of Jakobson's one-stem verb system, some fellow Slavists looked at my system and said, well, it all may be very economical and a very neat description, but it's, students may not have the easiest time with it. So anyway, you could just decide. At the very least, it will show you something about what there's a lot of material, I better get to it now, and you'll see what things are about. So let's just move ahead and see how this works. Now, as I mentioned, Russian stress types can often look very complicated and hard to remember, and I'm going to present them in a new way that you most likely have never seen before, and then it's your choice. You can say, that's it, once is enough, or I'd like to really get into this a little more, and I'd be happy to answer questions or show you how you could further your knowledge if you are interested in this. Now, let's start with a basic point about Russian stress. The vast majority of Russian words have a constant stress on a fixed syllable, and in all the forms of the word. And in these cases, you just remember where the accent mark is. So we're not talking about these. So that's that even though, well, the situation is this, if you take a Russian dictionary, it's like maybe 90% of the words in the dictionary, but they're not the most common words. So like all these scientific words, if you take words, you know, like borrowed words for places, and I'll give you some examples. Well, even some really common words. There's some are common that have this stress type. Take the word, well, let's call this type A first of all. Type A means you mark, let's just illustrate. Say, желудок, right? The word for stomach. It's always, we can just mark that as type A, and, you know, желудок, all right, and желудка, желудки, and so on. Every form of that word has exactly the same stress, so we're not going to worry about it. So the way my system works is that in the first place you have two big sections. Well, we'll see that in a diagram later. But you have type A and then everything else. Everything else is the stuff you have to worry about because it's where you don't have one syllable. Now you still, no one's going to memorize that for you, by the way. You take the word желудок, if you can't remember that the stress is on the yeah or the oo instead of the yeah, you know, there's no way you can figure that out. For that, you need a language like French, maybe, where every word stresses the last syllable, or Polish, every word stresses the next to last syllable. Russian is not like that. You still have to learn something about stress. But it's relatively easy, because you don't get movement within the word. Like, you know, the hard thing is when the word itself may have some changes. All right, babushka is another easy one. I'm just showing you that sometimes it's the middle syllable, sometimes it's the beginning or initial syllable. Действие is another one. There's a lot of words. You could think of it. America would be an easy one that's type A. So this is type A you can figure out with no difficulty. And we could also call that lexical stress because words are often called lexical items. And so we can say the lexical item determines where the stress is. The grammar doesn't play any role. See, the other type are where the grammar would play a role. Why? Because depending on what grammatical ending you have, or what grammatical form you're dealing with, the stress will be in a different place. So this is one easy thing you could start with, the lexical type versus the grammatical. Right? So going on from there. Okay. The more troublesome type, as I said, is where accent is not on the same stem syllable in all the forms. It's either on some endings or all the endings, or in other words, it's something other than the same stem stress always in every single form. And that is grammatical or morphological stress, more or less the same thing. Morphological would just be the various word forms. And grammatical positions determine the stress. We will concentrate here in the Russian noun. I have a few small comments I could make about verbs if we have time. And we're going to look at the singular and plural patterns as separate units. This is an important point, because the way it works is that very often, if you take the singular and plural together, you don't get very neat patterns. But if you look at the singular and the plural separately, you see that they interchange very often. And the neat pattern can be most easily seen by looking at the singular and plural separately, as separate units, sort of like more the atoms of the situation, rather than you know, a big amount. You want the minimal amount of material to make sense. So anyway, you'll have to realize that we're going to talk about the singular and plural sometimes separately. And the singular and plural forms all together are known as the full paradigm of the word, right? That's the paradigm. And since the singular or plural alone each constitute half, they are called subparadigms, right? Those are the subparadigms of the word. And since we gave the name type A to the kind of word where the accent's always in the same place, there's two basic types other than that. See, now, not 18, but only two other types. So what my system does is it reduces the total number of stress types. Now, there are some exceptions, by the way. Every system has a few exceptions. But the regular types are only A, B, and C. But, you know, just before you get too happy, wait till you see what B and C look like, right? Well, that's coming up. Right, so the two basic types are type A, B, and C, and you'll have to pay close attention to how we define B and how we define C. See, the alternative is, as I say, if you want 18, they're all neatly defined and everything, but B itself is going to have a lot of variables depending on certain things, and so is C. So you'll see what that looks like. Now, type B and C each can have two possible stress positions, right, in the word. So in other words, the way it works is there's a lot of overlapping. And I put the diagrams at the bottom. I'll refer to these. These are diagrams of A, B, and C. And the straight line refers to where the accent is allowed. And the dotted line means where the accent does not occur in each one. So I'll try to show you these. I hope you have some general concept of a stem and an ending. If you're dealing with Russian, you know, say, muzей, you have a zero ending. Muzea, it would be muzей plus an I ending, and so on and so forth. Kniga, knigi, and you know where the stem and the end. You need to know that to do this system. Okay, so anyway, A we talked about already, but I think it makes it a little bit easier to see like a picture of what this looks like. In the case of A, anywhere in the stem is possible. Any vowel, of course, we're only talking about stress on vowels. So that you could have желудок, it would be here. Действие, it would be here. In other words, any syllable in the word can have the accent in A. But the issue with A, the essence of the type A, is that it's going to stay in the same place throughout the whole paradigm. All right. Now B. B, as I put here, notice how I wrote it, can stress either the ending or the stem final syllable. But it's easier if you just look at this, because you can see what B is doing, it's straddling the stem ending boundary. In other words, it's either here or here. So everything we call B is going to have to stress either in this position or this position. Sometimes both. In other words, that is the invariant, as linguists would call it, would be that it's in one of these two positions. So anything that we call a B stress it can have many possibilities. You see, that's what I mean. It's not always going to be here. It could be here or here. And then if we look at C, C is very, very defined as well. C means it's always the initial syllable of the stem or the initial syllable of the ending. Well, this also could be the initial syllable of the ending. Notice they coincide with the initial syllable of the ending. So B and C both can use that. That is what we could call neutralization. So there's a neutralization of the stress between B and C types on the ending. The last syllable of the ending is never used. It's always the only syllable or the first syllable of the ending that uses it. Where B and C are very different is in where the stem portions, where they can, B would always be the last one of the stem, and C the initial. Now sometimes there's only one stem, one syllable. What happens then? Well, then you have to look at the whole pattern, you see how it behaves, you see how the mobility works, and you could usually figure it out. But you have to see the cases to really understand how they work. And you may also wonder, how is it possible? If both can have the end, we may have end in both cases. No, but it's kind of like an amazing fact. You can always, in almost every noun class, either this one comes into play or this one comes into play in some way. So that if you get, for example, if you get one type has the stress here, or say here and here, but the other one is on the end, you know that the end couldn't be this one because it's opposed to something where it's distinctive as B. So this is where I had my fun playing around with these. I took all of the 18 or so types, and in each case, I tried to identify which is B and which is C. And in almost virtually every single case, one of them is crystal clear. Then the other one, by default, winds up being B or C. So you'll see that when we see some more examples. Okay. Well, this is just a general chart, just showing you what the whole thing looks like globally. And I used a few names that came from a famous Russian linguist who worked on this, Zalesnyak, Andrei Zalesnyak, who was very nice and hospitable when I visited Russia, and shared a lot of insights. His term is trivial. He used this in Russian, trivialное ударение. And because, why is it trivial? Because, well, you mark the stress and that's the end of the story. There's no complex rule involved, and he knew this very well, except that he has a totally different system than I'm presenting to you now. But he has a very well thought out term, trivial and non-trivial. So we have all of Russian noun stress, and then you have the trivial type, which is on the stem. We push this aside, and we're concentrating on this now, the non-trivial, where you have stem final or the ending, right? Notice for B, or initial or the ending, right? For C, right? And notice initial is not only initial for the word itself, but the way it worked in Old Russian and modern Russian to some extent, the preposition was part of the word unit. So, for example, sometimes you've seen a phrase like zagodet in Russian. Well, you can tell right away, where would that belong? Well, zagodet, because the za, see, that's initial. So godet is definitely, would belong in the C category in initial, and you can see how that works, because initial often means, it's not always true, because Russian doesn't have it as actively as Old Russian did, so in many, many words we still see that, but there are some that are exceptions and don't always move it to the preposition. But anyway, that's an example of initial. So we'll forge ahead. Now, I gave you some of these examples before, but here are some more examples showing how these stress positions work. For types B and C, the examples are shown, and I'll identify for you whether they're singular. Some come from the singular, some come from the plural. But notice, since they're definitional, in other words, the stem final or end for B and initial or end for C, that it doesn't matter if they're singular or plural. They have to fit the definition. So let's look at that. And I have the same examples again, or one new one, balota, for to give you a neuter. So we have a masculine, a feminine, and a neuter to give you a broad range of examples for A. And every one of these A's, in other words, will stay the same. So balota can be balotia or balotum, and so on. It's always this, A means it's the same. We know that already. Now, you look at B. Here are some B examples. Now, we're not even identifying much about it, but just to show you that you know in advance, based on what we just learned in the last slide, the stress has got to be either on the end position or the stem final. Well, look at this, viditiono, but the plural is viditiona. You see what happens? It goes from the end, and then the plural, it moved to, look at where that is. Viditiona is the last syllable. It could never be viditiona. Then it would never be a B. So we call it a B. This is a typical B pattern. It's viditiono throughout, right? Then sirata, sirote, right? And that one is another example of a B type, right? You could come up with more. Kolbasa, kolbase. You see kolbasa shows the end, so that's a pure B. B in the singular, B in the plural. Okay, then here's C. Some C examples. We have galava. Now, if you look at galava alone, you can't really tell because it's on the end, right? But then golavu, in the same, even in the same singular, right? So you have galava, gola, that's got to be a C because it's end in one position. So you see how you can identify it, even though you might say, well, wait a minute, end stress could be either. How do I know? You look at the whole picture, right? So galava, golavu, it's got to be a C. Even though galava itself, if you only knew the word galava, you wouldn't know if it was golavu or golavu. So you have to know, in other words, you say, well, you have to know what the paradigm looks like before you can classify it. But then if you were a student, say, and I told you this is a C, then you'd know, you of course would know that way. And of course, if your textbooks don't have this information, then someday you can write the textbook that has it. Look at golava golavam, in the plural it does the same thing. You see initial and end. So I'm showing you, you see how this manifests the C rule. And here, even though maybe you know all these words, I don't know how well, golava probably everyone knows. Ведомости, like information, just ведомости, and then ведомостей, right? Notice end stress, but then notice ведомости. The plural, nominative plural, accusative plural, ведомости, but then ведомостей. So typical, it never could stress this, because what would it be if it stressed here? It would be a B, you see. So that's why these are not haphazard. So what bothers me about cataloging 18 different types It's not, well, I'm going to go out and, like, you know, write whatever kinds of species I see. It doesn't imply that there are like thousands of these types of species. They're very, very delimited if you get right into it. Okay, so now we're coming to how I break up my, because actually there really are maybe 18 different types at a lower level, but how do I deal with calling them only B and C? Well, I break up my B into lots of subtypes based on how they behave in certain ways. And that's what you're going to see. You obviously can't memorize it from what I'm doing, but I'll show you how I do it, right? B and C each have two subtypes. And type B subtypes depend on the genitive case ending. Right? Let's take a look at that. We'll look at B first. B is actually a little easier than C, so it's convenient that it'll come before it. But C types depend on the nominative case ending. So actually, if you know a few rules and you get a B, you don't have to even know where the accent is. You just have to know what the nominative case is for C and know what the genitive case is for B. And that's kind of amazing too, because if you look at, say, you know, Jakobson's classification of cases, nominative and genitive play a very, very key role in the case system of Russian. And what my thesis would be about stress is that either stress is bolstering that and giving like a redundant clue to what's the nominative and what's the genitive, or maybe the nominative and genitive themselves are kind of bolstering the stress system. I think it's probably the first thing I mentioned, but anyway, that's something that linguists can puzzle about. Let's take a look at what the rules are for, how does the genitive case determine this? It's not that hard, really. It looks hard because I put all the details in. I'll tell you how I use it myself, okay? Very simple. You know, it's a genitive. I don't care, singular or plural, right? Any genitive case in a Russian noun is either going to be a zero ending or something else, right? If it's a zero ending, it's going to stress the stem of a B, the stem final for B. If it's a non-zero, that is a vowel ending, it's going to stress the ending. So that's what the whole story would be. I try to make it precise so you can see. It applies to both the singular and plural. You get a non-zero. You can get a non-zero ending. That means an A, for example. Say a B, stol, stala, right? Stala. So it means that if stol is a B, the singular has got to stress the ending throughout because it has not, the genitive is non-zero. All right? The result is then stress in the entire subparadigm. In other words, the genitive singular affects the singular, the genitive plural affects the plural. That's why we separate the singular from the plural. Right? The plural only can have either this one or this one. In the plural, we can have a zero genitive. So let's take a case of this viditsuno thing. That I think it's a spinning wheel, right? In case you're not familiar with it, or if you don't know what a spinning wheel is, I don't have one in my briefcase, so you'll have to just remember that it's viditsuno. Anyway, all right, you have viditsuno as a B, right? And you have to know, say, if you know that in the plural it uses a zero genitive, right? Viditsuon. You know the whole plural, right? So it's going to be, it means you're going to get stem final in the entire subparadigm. That explains why you have viditsuno, because what's the genitive in the singular? In the singular, it's viditsuona, right? So it's going to be, so that's the whole story with the B. The B you can dispense, actually C is slightly hard, but B is really pretty easy. Because let's give you a new B. Once I tell you it's a B, but of course you have to know, say, how do I know if it's a B or C if I see a word? That you can't predict. You have to be told it's either A, B, or C. That you must know. But that's only 3 pieces of information. The rest, this is in your brain already. I can't give you a thing because it doesn't exist where you get a word and say, there's something that was going to flash A, B, or C. For that, you need special wiring where it's going to, hooked up to a computer. If you're normally, you have to know that. So take another B, kolbasa, right? It's dinner time after this, so take a nice piece of Russian sausage. And kolbasa, I tell you it's a B, right? What's the genitive? Does the genitive have a vowel or a zero in the singular? Well, in the singular, everything has a vowel. Nothing has a zero. So it's going to be kolbasa, kolbasu, kolbasu, right? So it's easy. The plural, though, is kolbas. So what does it mean? What's the plural? Kolbasa, kolbase, right? Kolbasami, and so on and so forth. So that's the end of the story. That's B is pretty easy, right? All right, so that's B. Now you'll see something a little harder. All right, well, just to wrap this up, the B subtypes are genitive case ending it is 0 or something else. In the singular, there's only the non-zero genitive. The rule is if type B genitive is 0, all the subparadigmatic forms stress the same stem final, like kalbase, kalbasemi, and so on. Oh, by the way, kalbas. If it's a 0, it's got to be on the end, you know. So the thing is, sometimes you get a 0 ending, like kalbas. Well, it's still stem final, but sometimes there's no choice. If it would have been on the ending, it would still have to go on the one before that. But that's pretty obvious. So anyway, if it's non-zero, it's just going to stress the ending within the singular or plural. But notice that's one reason you have to split up the singular and the plural, because they each work independently. In other words, each one looks at its own genitive and decides, if you have a B, right? So that covers like every B noun in Russian will follow that, as long as you know it's a B. Of course, now your textbooks are not going to necessarily tell you, because the textbook definition of B may not be the one that I'm using. My definition comes from that invariant of a stem that only has either end stress or stem final. Here I'm giving you some examples. We more or less looked at the same thing just to give you some more illustrations. These are some examples of B subparadigms with non-zero genitive. All right, we can look at the zero genitive or the non-zero. So here's some examples with non-zero genitive and end stress. And all the genitive singular endings are non-zero, and all singular B stress is end stress for that reason, right? So these are all singulars. I just try to pick something from different genders. Say yazik, you know it's a B. So yazik. Now this is what I mean. It's supposed to be end stress with yazik, but since it's a zero ending here in these two forms, it's just, you know, it's stem final, but at an underlying level, you could say, or a structural level, we still consider that it's the zero that's stressed. I could have written it with a stress 0. I don't know. I just was giving the actual Russian written word here. Yazikie, yaziku, and so on. And then viditino we looked at already. Notice the genitive here. This is the indicative item, not a 0. And stirkaza, the dragonfly, word for dragonfly. Stirkaza, stirkazu, it's a B, so it's going to be stressed on the ending. Right, now I have a bunch of plurals that I'm going to look at. And here it gets kind of interesting, because here you can have a non-zero plural in Russian for this B type, or you can have, so this is where all the other, this is where you can at least see where my system differs from the others. The other system would say, now wait a minute, this is different stress than this. They're different, they're not the same, but I call them the same. You see my strategy here of calling them the same. I call them the same because I'm predicting it by whether the genitive is 0 or non-zero. Every other system that I know of in the world for this type of thing says they're different because they actually have different stresses and they have different endings. But I'm using the genitive to predict it. So consider these here. You can see the first noun has a non-zero, so just the same as the singular, it's stressed throughout. Yazaki, yazakov, yazakak. But here you have your viditiona, and here for the first time you encounter the plural for dragonfly. Notice it's stirkos here, so it's stirkoze, stirkoza, and so on. Stirkozami, as long as you know it's a V. All right. Right. So anyway, that is the essence of my system is that I want to call Yazaki and Viditiona the same thing and predict it by the genitive plural. Everybody else except one person. By the way, there's a well-known Russian linguist, accentologist, Dubois, whose late wife, I heard from a third party, had this idea but never published it. I heard that from an accentologist named Teda Vanesova. Told me when I was in Moscow a few years ago, because I told her about my system and we discussed it. And she said, "Oh, Churganova, who was Dubois' wife, who unfortunately has passed away, and she had this idea but never published. I had no idea at the time that occurred. So somebody had the idea beside me. Note that a type B noun has the same stress throughout each subparadigm. Type C, now we're getting to C. C is harder, but you'll see what it looks like. C differs in that in C, you can have a variation inside the subparadigm. But the variation is very, very delimited. You can have one form that's different than all the others within the singular or plural. No, never more than one form, and it's always a form in an E or an U. It's very, very, very delimited. And you'll see, I put that here too. Type C differs in that it can have a single case form that differs from all the other cases, such as Golovu as an example. This single opposed form always has a high vowel ending, and it always affects either the most central nominative accusative cases or the least central locative. We'll take a look at how that works with C. You really have to see the examples to get an idea. Now, the two C subtypes depend on the nominative case. Just like as the B depended on the genitive case, here everything depends on the nominative case. So if you're told something is a C, it will depend on the nominative. Now, what are the choices? The two types are either high or low vowel, which means I, U, A. Now, if you know phonetics, this is like, you know, very, very well known to you. If you're not familiar with phonetics, then of course it's a little different. So it depends on whether it's a mid-vowel or not, basically. Because mid and zero is one category for the, and of course that gives us our masculine and neuter, right? Mid and zero gives you your basic masculine and neuter. But the reason it's not gender, also most of the handbooks tell you it's gender, because there are some feminines that are zero too, like Vietnamist. And then it behaves exactly as a zero, or like masculine, you see. So it isn't really the gender, it's really the ending that is determining this. So one category of nominative endings is I or A types in the nominative. Now where do you get E in the nominative? Well, that's in the plural. So I'm mixing plural information with singular information. We'll see all these examples in a moment. So one type is a high or low vowel. The second is a mid or zero. Right? So where does this apply? This is the same sort of chart that I had with the B, but I'm doing it for C. So the mid-zero only occurs in the singular, and the result is initial stress, except for end stress in the EU locative 2. That's where you'll get something like bierig, bieriga, but birigu, because it's a C with a mid or zero ending. Notice it's a zero ending in the nominative. Bierig. Bierig will fit this. When the nominative is high or low, it can happen either in the singular or the plural. In fact, all the plurals are of the high-low type. And there, you get end stress in the whole subparadigm, with the exception of one initial. So here you have, it's the opposite. It's really a mirror image. Here you get one end stress and all the rest initials. Here you get one initial and all the rest end stresses. So they're really mirror images. I just can't bring all this out. If we had like a few sessions, I could bring this out in more detail. Now I'm just like giving you a flavor of it. You can't possibly learn all this, but you'll see what it's about. They're mirror images of each other, and I'll just show you examples. Then I think it'll jump out much more clearly. So let's just look at some examples and see how this works. The first four examples have zero. They're masculines or feminine, by the way. Notice masculine, masculine, zero, and here's two feminine with zeros, right? And look how they work. What's the rule with zeros? If it has a zero ending. Or it's actually the same rule with all the way up here. It's the same rule, because mid-vowel or zero is one category, right? So bierig, volk, vietnamese, ois, zierkala, all follow the rule of a mid-vowel or zero nominative. And what does it mean? They're all initial except for L2 if it occurs. See? So L2 is the locative 2. So here it's bierig, bieriga, right? Everything's initial. And I'm choosing multi-syllables where I can to show you that, how that works. So, but birigu, right? Birigu. Here, volk, there is no L2. I think for human beings, there aren't any L2s, so it just doesn't occur. But so you get initial all the way through here. Vietnamese does not have an L2. Lots of words don't have an L2. Vietnamese, right? It's a zero in here. Now, os does have an L2, the word for an axis. The same word as English, by the way, os, axis, right? Well, English, of course, came from Latin. Anyway, os, but then na asi, right? You have oisi would be the genitive case, say, or the dative, but then you have asi, which is that locative 2, na asi, on the axis. And zierkala follows the same rule, but of course neuters in O never have a locative 2. Now we get to what happens. The other type is where you get either an E, ah, or oo in this, well, actually nominative either can only be ah or E, not even oo. An ah or E nominative, high or low. The high or low type, you get the opposite. Notice these are all initial with one end in the locative. These are all end, but one initial in that oo, right? So that's the way that works. So that's what C, and that's it. That's C. You see A, B, and C. So the rest is just like filling in the details, but this is all the basics, right? So here in this type, rather than, you remember what the B was like where, with the genitive case. This one, you look at the nominative, and you have one big group that has a standout accusative, like that, in the singular, and you have one that has a standout L2, right? Then we get to the plural, and there is no such thing as a zero mid-type. They're all, everything is either high or low in the plural. And let's see what that looks like. In the plural, everything is either a high vowel, like you have the E's, right? Or a low vowel, ah. Ah is a low vowel, E is a high vowel. So everything's divided into that. And how does that work? Well, they are all the same type that has mostly end stresses, except for high vowels in the direct cases. That is the nominative, basically, with the accusative, which sounds the same. So your nominative form, if it's an E, gets this. That's why you get, notice, zirkala, but you get osi, vjedomosti, volgi. And that's what typical. This one, the accusative, of course, follows the genitive, so it's volkov. And so here we have total end stress. Why? Because it does not have a single direct case in an E. Okay. Well, this shows how the basic rule goes. And just to go over it again, the plural is shown, well, this is below, not above here. Only the high-low types of nominatives can occur in the type C plural. You don't get any of the other type, in zero, for example, or mid. And no high, you can't have an L2. There's no high vowel locative. So the pattern is end stress, except for direct cases. Now what I'm doing that, again, nobody does, as far as I know, is I'm tying together the ah here with the ah in the singular, the feminine. So I'm saying basically that galava, the stress of galava, follows the same basic rules as zirkala, right? Which is quite unusual, but anyway, just so you see the point of what I'm trying to do. Of course, you have to memorize all the details in a different way. Well, in addition to the pure type, this is, I guess, where you say, oh, wait, that's the fine print, right? Here comes the fine print. That in some nouns in Russian, it's kind of a small number, but sometimes you get a B singular with a C plural, or a C singular. And I'm saying this because then you have like the complete inventory with a tiny number of exceptions. But that happens too. And just to make sure I realize our time may not be that long, so I won't go over everything in great detail. But the entire inventory would be this. That means this is the entire inventory of Russian noun stress. 5. Including mixed types. Because you have your A, we talked about your B, where the genitive case determines it, 0 or non-zero. Then you have your C, where the nominative case determines it, and even, I'll show you, I memorized my own material, at least, so it's possible to remember it. That's where you have your mid-zero class as against your high-low vowel class, right, in type C. Then you have your mixed, which really just means, say, BC means, in the singular, you look at the genitive case to find out what's going on, and in the plural, you look at the nominative, right? And of course, the CB is the opposite. In the singular, you look at the nominative and determinant, and in the plural, you look at it. I'll show you. Here's some examples of BCs and CBs. Say, for example, and you know how many there are? There's like 4 of these. Coin. There's 4. Gvost, grust, coin, and one more I can't think of, right? But anyway, that's like the whole category. So what does it mean? In the singular, you look at it's a B type, which means, all right, it's end stress, so kanya, right? Kanya, kanyu. But in the plural, it's koni, and then kanye, kanyami, and so on. And guba, lit, is the same situation as coin. You get guba, gubu. In other words, in the accusative, you don't have the initial stress. If you did, it would have been a pure C. So actually, it may look like a big difference. It's a tiny difference, actually. And achko would fit that in the neuter as well. The reason for that is because, well, there you have actually, I have to think about it. And notice the plural is achki, so it follows the E ending, and it's not, that was my old system. I don't think I would do that anymore. I think I'd have to, I'll have to rethink achki. I think achki, because in my old system I did it by gender, and now I do it by case ending. I think that crept in, because we can even analyze it. You see, because if we changed this to an on-neuter, like sushestvor, it would be a BC. But actually, achki, to be a C, would have to retract to ochki, which it isn't. It's achki. So actually, because of the E ending, that would be a pure BB, right? Achki. Now notice that that would be because of the ending. So sushestvor, a neuter, would be a BC. Indeed, this should be changed to sushestvor or bishestvor. Achki actually is a pure B type, because thanks to its irregular plural ending, right? I guess everybody knows that achki is the plural of achkor, means points or eyeglasses. And CB would be the opposite. In the case of CB, we get shag, shaga, but in the plural, it would be shagi, shaguf. And, well, vada would follow the same pattern. C in the singular, vada, vodu. But then the plural would have that vode, vodemi, and you look at the genitive plural to determine its stem final. Right? In other words, you follow the same rules, but you split the singular and plural into two types. Right? A computer could probably do this pretty easily. Right? Whether the human brain can or not, I guess, depends on how much you want to do it. Well, in the case of a BC noun, I'm just going through the same things. You would split it up and analyze it separately. And for reference, all the major types are shown in the following. We have a following table where I put all the different types. I'll have to check achki, because I think that would be slightly different. That goes back to when I was doing it by gender. But so essentially, I have 5 basic noun stress types. But they're defined by B type referring to the genitive case, and C type referring to the nominative case, and you wind up with, in other words, AA, BB, CC, the pure types, then you have your BC and CB, and that's it. There's one major exception only, that is foreign words like tamada look feminine, they have a 0, but they don't go to tamadid, they stay as tamada, because this is a group of Central Asian, Caucasian, and Ultra-Slavonic words where you have constant end stress. Let's see. Well, I have a few comments on verb stress, but I don't know, we could either end now or say a few things about how verbs work. Want to say a few words about that? Okay. Well, verbs are extremely easy in the present tense. Some people call it the non-past, because sometimes you can have a historical, present which really refers to the past. So let's just call it the present. And in that, you see the same, what I really love about the present tense accents, you see the same definitions that I used in nouns applying verbs, except that notice that be is never mobile. We get the stem final thing in the plural. Well, it's mobile across the numbers. Say vidituno, but vidituona. You see the stem final for be. Well, look at how be acts. Prashu, prosish, right? And how does that work? You see, you have end stress varying with this. Here's your stem final, right? This is a B. With A, I'm not even talking about. A is just you mark one syllable and it stays throughout with verbs too. So you get your B, which is prosish, and then prosit. But notice how you can recognize that. If it ends in a vowel, it's end stressed. If it ends in a consonant, it's stem final. So here you have prashu, prasya, or prasi, ends in a vowel, and it's end. If it ends in a consonant, like prosish or prosit, it is stem final. But it still fulfills the same definition that I had for nouns of be. So in other words, vidituno, vidituona is exactly analogous to prashu and prosish in terms of accent. And C would be end stress throughout. And that's what I mean. End stress usually works out that if you have an end stress type that's totally end stressed, and you can say, well, that could be B or C. The other one is going to give it away. So here, this could only be B because it's stem final. You see, prosish and prashu could only be a B. Why? You could say this could be initial too, because you put a prefix on, you get, for example, taprosish, and you can see it's really stem final. I guess you can't really, or if you take a multisyllable verb, like let's take one like maletit, right? Malotish, right? You can see it's B. So the B mobility, rather the verb stress mobility is of the B type. If you take a long word or a prefix word, you see right away. This is actually a bad example because it looks like it could be initial, but you never get this movement back to initial in verbs in the present tense, only the past tense. Well, that is at least how the present tense works. The past tense, I won't go into all the details. The way that works, there's only one type, but it's all predictable based on what the stem looks like. And it's all on here. I try to figure out most of it, just about all of it, but it depends on the structure. So it would be a lot of detail now. You probably need another session. But you could go through it and learn all the different types that create the environment for the single type of past tense stress for B and C. B and C are joined. And the reason they're joined, it's just I'll finish with this, is because past tense in Russian really comes from a participial type. It was a derived type. And in derivational forms, B and C always join. There's too many. It's only non-derived that really has separate B and C. So since the L of the past tense was considered to be participial and derived, they all join. So there's really only one basic underlying type. Again, some handbooks are going to give you every square in this box is going to be a different type. I say it's all one type, but I define it by the phonological environment or morphological. Thanks.